Thank you for checking out Scotty's Hobbies. Today we're going to be replacing the pads and rotors on this Lexus ES350. This will be the same, if not very similar, for other makes and models such as Toyota Avalon 2008 to 2018, a Camry 2007-2017, the Lexus ES350H, a 2013 to 2018, and the Lexus ES350 2007 to 2017. Getting started real quick, like most of my videos, first I turn the wheel to whatever side makes the caliper stick out more, so it's easier to access. You can see right here, so I turned it to the driver's side. I'm going to take a look at everything, the caliper, the bracket, my CV boot right there, the hub assembly. Just take a look at everything. Make sure you know what you're looking at, you don't find anything new. We will be removing the caliper bolts first and then the caliper bracket bolts to remove the bracket to get the rotor off. While you are watching this video, I'm going to try to tell you all the tools you need and the torque specifications to properly get this job done. Take note of where your wear indicator is, and if you don't know if your pad is bad, go ahead and look inside the little viewing window right there on the top side of your caliper, and you can see your pad. If you don't have any of that little gap right there, you for sure need pads. In this case, the rotors on this car are warped. Whoever did the brake job last time just didn't do the brake job right, didn't take their time. When I first got this vehicle in, I had to replace the hardware because that was all bad just to begin with. The slider pins weren't working. But to get this job done, to get the vibration out, we're going to be replacing the pads and rotors. First, you're going to remove these caliper bolts right here. You're going to be using a 14 millimeter socket. You can see there's two springs. Actually, there's one spring on this. There should be two springs right here. So another indicator that this brake job was not done properly before. Whoever did this BJ just does a really sloppy BJ. Hopefully they see this video. Now that we have the caliper off, we're going to use a caliper compressor. This is a little cheap one. It's like 10-15 bucks. There should be a link in the description below to purchase it. Before you compress your caliper, as I'm doing right here, make sure you release the cap on your brake fluid reservoir under the hood so the fluid has somewhere to go without blowing any seals. I lost that part of the video, sorry about that, but make sure your reservoir cap is off. You want to push the piston as far as you can back into the caliper housing. You can see right here, the pad is flush with the actual metal part of the caliper housing. It's all the way pushed in. It should not come back out unless you push the brakes, so make sure you do not touch the brakes after this point. Hopefully you don't touch the brakes after you start this job. You can see I'm using a bungee cord right here to hold the caliper up on my shock. This makes it so in case I hit it on accident or for some reason it falls, the caliper doesn't dangle or hang on the brake hose itself and cause any damage right there. You don't want to have any weak spots in the brake lines later. Now, using a 17 millimeter socket on a breaker bar, we're going to remove the caliper bracket bolts. These should be pretty tight. I'm using a hand tool, so hopefully you could use a hand tool as well to get it off. Again, 17 millimeter. I prefer a 6-point if you have one, but if you don't, use what you have. So the basic tools you need to get this brake job done is your 3/8 socket set, a 1/2-inch socket set, because that's going to be your bigger one. You might even be able to find a 17 millimeter in your 3/8 set, and really, just a 3/8 set might get you done. But where you might run into the problem is when you torque the parts down later on, you might need a 1/2-inch torque wrench and a 1/2-inch socket to tighten down the caliper bracket. But we'll get to that later. Now that you have the bracket off, you could remove the rotor, set it off to the side. You can see we're using Power Stop Evolution brake pads and rotors. In the kit, you get some nice little literature to let you know what they offer, the different brands that they have, or the different lines that they have, and what they are. Opening the brake box, that is some lube, some brake caliper lube. Here is a boot set and your little rubber piece that goes on your caliper slider. You have two sets, so this will be good for two different types of vehicles. That's why this covers many vehicles over many years, which is pretty cool. So use whichever one applies to your vehicle. This is the hardware set, and new springs and new wear indicators. I prefer a brake set like this Just replace everything while you're here. Don't try to reuse anything that's old. Put everything brand new. You don't want to have to buy a brake set and then a hardware set on top of that. So when you do purchase a brake set, if you do not end up getting a power stop set like this, make sure it contains a hardware kit. There should be links in the description below to purchase this set. And let me know if you do get it, or if you prefer a different brake set and why. I always like to hear opinions on parts and tools, so let me know what you think. If this video does help you out, make sure you comment below and mention the year, make, model of your vehicle. Now with the caliper bracket off to the side, we need to make sure that these sliders freely move. They don't want to have any restriction going in and out of this caliper. Sorry, caliper bracket that is. So this one you can see it's got a little rubber grommet on the bottom. Make sure you keep these in a place or in a fashion that they're going to be reinstalled in the same orientation. Clean them off really good. If there's any pitting on these or anything that's just not right, replace them. You can see I used brake clean to get all the old stuff out of the channels on this caliper bracket. It was really dirty. Using the new hardware kit, I'm going to install these silencers or shims. Make sure they're in the right order, in the right fashion. They have little spring or retaining springs on them, so they all are oriented in a certain way. So make sure they're in the right fashion so you can put your pad on easily. You can see this part was kind of confusing me, so hopefully it doesn't confuse you as it did me. This brake job takes about an hour and a half to do, and I would say if you don't have any experience, it shouldn't take too much longer after you watch this video and have everything all together to get the job completed. The slider pins I'm going to use or lube using some synthetic brake lubricant. This is meant for brake calipers. It won't break down, or it should not break down with heat or with extended wear because of the temperature that these things operate at. So make sure you're using the appropriate grease. I'm pretty liberal. I don't want to use too much to where it's just going to like squeeze out when I push it in. If it does, make sure you wipe that off because you don't want to get any of this grease or lube on the caliper, or on the pad I should say, and make it a lot harder to stop. So be careful, make sure you're pretty clean when you're in this scenario. This kit came with a new rubber grommet that goes on your slider pin. You can see that was in the kit that came with the brake pads. So we're going to go ahead and replace this, and we're going to lube it up just the same as we did the other slider pin. I'm using the spring that goes on the pad to remove the little grommet. You can do the same, or if you have a little pick, you could do that too. Or if yours is loosey-goosey, come right off. A lot of them do that. Here's my new grommet. Put that on, lube it up, jam it in the hole, and let's get ready to install this caliper. So if you were to take this to a shop, I would honestly say this job, everything, you could end up paying upwards of about $400. If you call and get an estimate on this job, make sure you comment below and let me know what they said too. $350 to $400 for the parts and labor is probably not a bad deal. It's a pretty good, honest deal. Here are your wear indicators. This is why it is important to make sure you take note of the fashion or where your wear indicators were when you were taking everything apart or disassembling everything. You want it to go back in the same exact way as you took it off. Here is my new rotor. These rotors are labeled on which side, driver or passenger side, that they belong on. Hopefully don't get those mixed up. That shouldn't be too hard for you. When I install my new caliper, my new bracket, my new rotor, I like to use one lug nut to hold the rotor in place if there's not a production screw that is meant to do this job for it. So this makes it a lot easier so that rotor doesn't move around and flap around when you're trying to line everything up. One lug nut is all you really need. Now we're going to install the caliper bracket. This thing has to be tightened down pretty good. And honestly, I've seen other vehicles where the torque specification was like 90 foot-pounds, but this one, you're using that 17 millimeter, hopefully a 6.17 millimeter, and you're going to use a torque wrench to properly tighten these down. That's going to be tightened down to 79 foot-pounds. That's 79 foot-pounds on each one of these bolts that hold the caliper bracket on. When you torque everything down, you want to go to the first click. As soon as you get that click on that torque wrench, you're nice and dandy. I used to go to 2 or 3 clicks, but it was pointed out to me that, hey, that second or third click might be the click that ruins the threads. I really didn't think about that before, but One of my viewers pointed that out, and it makes plenty of sense after thinking about it for a while. So just go to that first click and you'll be totally fine. Again, 17 millimeter, 79 foot-pounds. I get a lot of people that ask if it's really important to use a torque wrench when tightening everything down. When it comes to brakes, I think it's especially important to make sure everything is properly tightened down. You don't want to over tighten it, taking the chance of warping the rotor in some fashion. So I always recommend tighten everything down to factory specifications if possible. Now when installing your new pads, make sure you have your wear indicator in the same fashion as it was when you removed it or disassembled everything. I also like to take a lot of pictures. I'd make the videos obviously for you guys, but I like to take a lot of pictures as I go through this process, just so I could go back through and say, okay, yes, it was like that, or yes, it was like this, or oops, I need to change it to what it was like this. So every time I take the brake pads off, take a picture, take the caliper off, take a picture of everything. Makes it much easier for you. And now everybody has a camera in their hands all the time. Makes it much easier. It'll save you some time. Let's get ready to install the caliper with the recessed piston inside it. If for some reason your piston has come out, go ahead and push it back in, at this time using your old brake pad, not one of these brake pads you have here. These springs are on the pads to push the pads or to take the pads off of the rotor after you get done pushing on the brakes or on the brake pedal. So when you push the brake pedal, the caliper pushes the pad onto the rotor, and then when you let off, these springs will take the pad off the rotor a little bit so they don't rub on it and cause excessive heat and or sounds like some road sounds that might just annoy you. So make sure you have both of these springs on. When you tighten down the caliper, make sure this slides on pretty easy. You don't want to knock off one of the silencing shims on the back side of the pad, and you don't want to make it loose or anything. You'll get like a weird metal rubbing sound down the road pretty quick. Tighten down these caliper bolts. These are lightly torqued down to 25 foot-pounds using a 14 millimeter socket. I prefer using a 6-point socket anytime I'm using the torque wrench. The one with more points or 12-point is not easier to strip out the bolts, I feel. I could be wrong though. Let me know your opinion in the comment section below. You might need to use a crescent wrench or an open-end wrench to hold the slider pin when you torque down the caliper bolts. Hopefully you don't, but that would be the only need to have a crescent wrench to get this job done. Now before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we need to pump the brake pedal. Pump the brake pedal till it becomes nice and firm. It's usually about 3 to 5 nice presses of the brake pedal and it should become nice and firm. Make sure you have your brake fluid reservoir cap back on and make sure it's topped off before you do so. Torque down the lug nuts when you put them back on just to give you a better all-around job. If this video did help you out, make sure you comment below with the year, make, model of your vehicle. Make sure you check out my other videos. I have a ton of brake jobs, and tell everybody about me. Thanks for staying tuned till the end. I'll see you on the next, hopefully helpful video.